welcome to you all. I'm Yolande Chan. I direct the Mollison Center at Queen's School of Business, and we are here today to address a very important topic, which is the future of Canada's economy, especially the role of the creative economy in that future. Today we are beginning a seminar series. It will have 5 sessions. Several of our presenters are here, and if you are in the room, I just ask that you raise your hands, please, if you are participating in the seminars that will be following. And we welcome you all. We thank you for your interest in the future of Canada. The focus of this seminar series will not only be the creative economy, but in particular the implications of this economy for the future of rural Canada. I'd like to acknowledge several people who are really playing key roles in making today's seminar possible. First, I'd like to thank Queen's Video Conferencing, who are quietly and very ably ensuring that we stay connected and that this rolls out beyond the university community to other communities, in particular U Guelph, U Waterloo, and I'm pleased to include Omafra as remote attendees of this particular seminar. I'd also very much like to single out Craig Desjardins, the Executive Director of Pella CFDC. Pella CFDC has contributed financially to this series to enable it to proceed, and we are very grateful. Thank you. One final comment before I introduce our guest speaker. There will be limited opportunity for discussion after Dr. Donald speaks. However, we are able to proceed upstairs, those of us who wish to and can, to room 403 for ongoing discussion for up to another half an hour to an hour. But we will end this session promptly at 5 to 1. There is a class that will be coming in at that time. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce a colleague I respect a great deal, Dr. Betsy Donald. She's our own Queen's University colleague, professor, and associate professor in the Department of Geography. Dr. Donald has degrees in history, environmental studies, planning, and geography from McGill, York, and U of T. She has done a great deal of research on the urban creative economy and is a registered professional planner. Dr. Donald consults and has addressed a range of public policy issues for all levels of government. Her report, Competing for Talent, Implications for Social and Cultural Policy in Canadian City Regions, was commissioned by Heritage Canada. Dr. Donald has 2 short-funded research projects, one on the creative class politics in Toronto and Boston, and another that focuses on the urban creative food economy. She has been a visiting scholar at Harvard University and has received numerous awards for her research, including the Governor General's Gold Medal. With no further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Betsy Donald as she addresses the
Thank you very much, Yolande, for that kind introduction and for all the support that the Mollison Center has given this important topic, really thinking about the economy from a sort of geographic perspective, a rural perspective, a regional perspective, an urban perspective. And I really want to situate this idea of the creative economy in the context of a long intellectual history that has occurred in fields that are all represented here: urban planning, economic geography, business economics, sociology. We're thinking about the question, why is it that some regions grow and others do not? So it's really situated in that bigger theoretical question of how do we theorize and how do we think about regional economies. I also want to thank the Pella Institute, and in particular Craig Desjardins, for supporting this series. This series, I think, came about in the summer when a few of us were all sitting around, and you know, there's always this thought, well, what is the creative economy? What does it mean? And unfortunately, I think I said too much, and then Dr. Chan said, why don't you speak on that? So I'm going to try and do this kind of overview of what are some of the key concepts, recognizing that it's a huge body of literature, and Kevin Stoller and I actually teach a course on creative economy, a graduate course that it goes on for weeks and weeks, so to try and get it into 40 minutes will be a challenge. And then maybe bring up some of the critiques, because you often hear a lot of critiques, both theoretical critiques as well as methodological. Of course, any method that uses quantitative analysis is always ripe for criticism. And then what are some of the public policy implications, critiques around sort of fast policy transfer. And then I just wanted to touch a little bit on the class and geographic perspectives, exploring why is it that this theory sometimes becomes pigeonholed into a class or geographic perspective, and arguing for why we could move beyond that at this point. And then I want to just show you a little bit from my own research area on the what I call the creative food economy, which I've written quite a lot about in the Canadian context. And then finally, summary. Given the time, should I probably just speak and then we'll have questions at the end? That might work better. So really, as I mentioned before, this is really fundamentally a regional and local economic development concept, and comes from a long tradition of economic geographers, regional economic development planners, thinking about why is it that some regions grow and others do not. The whole field of regional development, of course, back in the 50s and 60s, we thought about how regions, and this is particularly in the North American context I'm talking about. Obviously, there's a whole development studies literature that looks at uneven development across space, and I won't be touching on that because it's just another whole body of literature that we don't have time for. But keep in mind that most of these theories come out of an empirically driven studies of what's happening on the ground in North America. Most of these have focused on, there's a lot of studies that look at the region per se, thinking about why is it that in North America certain regions tend to continually do well, like Boston or New York, big cities, sort of this cumulative causation model over time. Whereas other studies look at the firm itself, they try and look at, many of you are familiar with the idea of attracting a particular type of industry to a region, the whole idea of economic multipliers. For example, if you can attract a big manufacturing plant, that would have important spin-offs, as well as things like economic base models that look at the role of export-oriented sectors as opposed to more internally oriented sectors, and the sort of crossover between the two. And then other studies, of course, that focus more on human capital models, the role that skills play in economic development. And of course, the creative economy really comes out of a tradition of thinking about all three of these things. And it really is, of course, most closely associated with the work of Richard Florida and his bestseller book, The Rise of the Creative Class, that was published in 2002, and then subsequent books. But I think you have to, again, situate it within the context of, again, a long intellectual history of thinking about economic transformation from a more of a place-based or geographical perspective. So there's a really great article by Jamie Peck in about the late 1990s that talked about how economists tend to look at modeling economic life, whereas economic geographers take a more messy look at the economy. So they're much more interested in sort of the place-based factors. They are more interested in sort of mixed methods approach, where they look at both quantitative, empirically driven studies, as well as more of the sort of cultural, political, and historical and geographical sort of dimensions of the economy as well. And I always thought that was a nice way of sort of thinking about where this fits in. So I would argue that the creative economy is really much more coming out from a sort of planning and geography kind of school. One of the things that geographers and economists and planners started to find during economic transformation in the mid-90s, 80s was that